Welcome everybody. My name is Kate Coleman. I am a World Counsellor for InSEA and I work at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne in Australia. We are in very interesting times in the world right now. And so I have here the executive of InSEA. For me, kind of global leaders in art education and in education through art to share some messages around the kinds of work that they're currently doing and they're thinking about the crisis that we currently find ourselves in, teaching in very different environments, as well as learning to deal with a time in the world that most of us have not recognized before. Even my 96-year-old grandmother doesn't recognize a moment in her lifetime that has felt or looked like this. And, you know, as teachers and as people working with beginning teachers and as artists, I think that we sit at the forefront of some of those discussions. This is who joins me on this current call. We decided to kind of run this as a webinar style, but because Zoom is currently dealing with lots of calls right now and sometimes flaky because so many people are on the internet all at once, we've recorded this to enable this webinar to live in a live space and hopefully to have a good social media presence and discussion in a synchronous for us, but asynchronous discussion for you, maybe even in your classrooms or with your students or just by sitting on Facebook and having a listen to these clever people talk about the state of art education at the moment. So I have with me the current InSEA president, Professor Glen Coutts, Professor Steve Willis and Professor Samia ElSheik, who are the InSEA vice presidents, InSEA secretary, Dr. Patsey Bodkin, InSEA treasurer, Célia Ferreira, and our InSEA past president, Dr. Teresa Eça. It's important that each of them get to introduce themselves and tell you where they are in the world right now. They're going to introduce, I guess, the role that they play, not just with InSEA, but the role that they play in art education. So we have a bit of an understanding contextually about where they're coming from in this discussion. And then we will focus on a question. And so I have posed this to the speakers in my night, some of their very early mornings and their days, to think about the role of art and art education in these times in the world and how art and art education can support us to be healthy, resilient, and courageous people. So over to you. Who would like to introduce themselves first?
I'll go first, Kate.
Thank you, Glen. Hello.
Hi. So my name is Glen Coutts. I'm Professor of Applied Visual Arts Education in the University of Lapland in Finland, but I'm Scottish. I grew up in the East End of Glasgow and I attended the Glasgow School of Art, and like everyone else, I was going to be a famous artist. But that's not how it panned out. So I studied what is now known as environmental art, and that fired my interest in this kind of liminal space between art and design. And that stayed with me. So I worked as a town or community artist. I became interested in the power of art as a collaborative and enabling force in community and environmental contexts. Then I taught art in secondary schools, Scottish secondary schools, for about 10 years. And it's interesting to note that in Scotland, the subject is called art and design. Then I spent about 20 years in teacher education at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. And for the past 10 years, I've been working in the far north of Finland, Finnish Lapland. And there my focus is on what's called applied visual arts education. And it's an area that melds the disciplines of art and design. And since I live mainly in Scotland, but work in Finland, I've been used to working remotely. But there are times where the screen just can't replace the experiential nature of practice in the environment or community or studio and our subject. And no doubt we'll discuss that in this session. So that's me.
Thank you. Steve, I'm going to dob you in next.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's nice to see everyone. I get the pleasure of seeing the executive board quite frequently in these days of opportunity and challenge. So my name's Steve Willis. I teach at Missouri State University in Missouri, which is a center part of the United States. I spent 23 years teaching in secondary, loving that role. I actually like teenagers. I had a great experience with them, and then moved into a graduate degree in mixed surfaces, drawing, painting, printmaking. My undergraduate degrees in photography. Got an opportunity to work at Missouri State in art education. I was the former coordinator of graduate and undergraduate studies. I recently retired that post and turned it over to my colleague. I'm a producing artist, spending quite a bit of time in the studio, published a book and multiple book chapters and articles, quite a few presentations, and some with the distinguished panel that you see here. I think that the COVID-19 has created a window for us to reflect and look at ourselves and what our practices are and what our habits have been over generations. And I firmly believe that some of those habits are outdated, antiquated, and no longer serve the needs of the 21st century citizen and 21st century student. Like Glenn, I spent quite a bit of time in blended coursework, so the internet screen is not foreign to me. I'm old enough to not like it. I like the physicality of and civility and humanity of face-to-face. I do a lot of energy work, so I use that as a guide to how I have conversations with people. I love my job. I love being part of InSEA and part of the exec. And Kate, thank you very much for hosting this webinar. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Samia, hello. I'm going to have to get you to do it one more time and click unmute.
Sorry, I forgot. I'm Samia ElSheik. I'm a professor of art education in the Faculty of Art Education, Halwan University in Cairo. I gained my PhD in the United States as a channel education between New York University and Halwan University. I'm practicing hand weaving, and I teach hand weaving in my college, and it's really the main thing that I'm interested in, plus art education and plus being a member of InSEA. I really like to be connected to schools. I teach in the university, but I still get connected to schools through my students when they are training in the schools. And the same times I worked in many projects as frequency projects that we were applying some canvas on the desks of the students in many schools around the Middle East. In my professional field, I'm working with my students in several theses and dissertation in art education and in hand weaving. I love my work. I love my studio. I have my own loom, and I had my last show in February, solo show, and I'm glad to be between you. Thanks.
Thank you. Patsey, your go. Hello.
Hi, Kate. Good to see you again. My name is Patsey Bodkin. I am a lecturer in the School of Education in the National College of Art and Design in Dublin, Ireland. Like so many of the panel here, I was an art teacher, secondary school art teacher for 20 years, loved every single minute of it. and now I work in initial teacher education in NCAD, and my research area is in the area of continuing professional development for art teachers. And it really, as a result of that I got involved with InSEA initially as a member. I'm delighted to be on the executive. Took a sabbatical in February of this year for 5 months to travel the world to catch up with InSEA members around the world and looking at initial teacher education and continuing professional development. And my timing has not been great. I did luckily get to Australia, and hopefully something will come out of that. But now I'm spending an awful lot of time doing InSEA work that I think we'll be discussing a little bit later, and how things change and change for the better. So that's me.
Wonderful. So many people keep posting online the places that they wish they were at. I figure you probably have those same stories in your head about where you might like to be right now. Can I ask you where you would have been right now?
America, I think, was the next stop. I was hoping to catch up with one of or two of our colleagues in America, go to Chicago, go to Vermont. And then I had planned to go to visit colleagues in Greece, in Portugal, two of whom are sitting here with me now, and then also to go to Finland. That was just the start. I know, not great for the carbon footprint, but I do like face-to-face, like Steve. I'm well used to online, so we changed, and I have to rethink things. This is a period of rethinking about what I do and the way that I do it. So that included.
Thank you. Célia, hello.
Hello, I'm Célia from Portugal, in the north of Portugal, and I am a visual teacher in the secondary school around 23 years. And I have a master in the art education, and my research was in the prison. It's a very difficult state, and now we are stay at home, and that people stay in prison, the other reasons, but it's similar. It's an experience very I don't know. I don't know how I tell you. Sorry. But it's very similar what we living in this moment.
The concept of isolation is a really difficult one for people like us as educators and as artists who actually work as collaborators.
Yes, it's very difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Teresa, lucky last.
So, hello, thank you, Kate. Thank you for arranging this conversation. So I'm Teresa, I'm from Portugal. I'm for the last 18 years, I work with the Art Teacher Association in Portugal with Célia, and I coordinate the teacher training center in the APEC, the organization. I'm also a visual art teacher in secondary schools, and drawing and history of art and design and so on. And I also collaborate with research centers in Portugal and in Spain. So that's what I do. And I started to be an artist, and I worked as an artist for some years before coming to be an art teacher. And then I fell in love by this profession. And here I am. And I like to define myself as a builder of networking. I like to put people together and share dreams and so on. So that's me.
Thank you. I think lots of art teachers love to be that builder of dreams. I've always thought of myself as a hand holder, someone who likes to kind of meet a person and then work out whose hand they will hold next. So in thinking about all the things that have been a common thread through this conversation already in your introductions, you've raised some ideas around the concept of embodiment, embodiment of being an artist, and this concept of being in our bodies and working with other bodies in our studios and classrooms. But you've also talked about being in online and digital environments, and that kind of embodiment is quite different. So in thinking about the kind of current state of art education, what kind of advice do you have for art teachers? So either becoming art teachers or current art teachers, as they are, in this emergency teaching mode, working out how to very quickly pivot their face-to-face studio teaching into online classrooms.
Can I start? I think in art education, material is very important. Like in my teaching of weaving, a student, when the quarantine came, students had to go home. Some of them are from not Cairo, so they had to go home without any material and without any looms, the frame looms. So they couldn't really get involved any practitioner of any weaving because of the lack of material and tools. So we had to start thinking that we are we have to go to a design just to make designs for the weaving, and when this become over, they can start weaving their pieces. But it seems that it's not going to be over soon. So I usually sit with my students online and show them some techniques, but I think it's not helping that much. It could help that they really draw or use some paints and things like that. It's easier for them than my teaching in the weaving techniques. So I had this group of women. They wanted to have a workshop in weaving, in hand weaving, and we arranged that like before the quarantine. And they kept asking, okay, let's do it. It's everybody's going out, so it's okay. We will be safe and have our own masks and our tools to be safe. And I really did it yesterday before. And I went with them to a large school. We sat on a open area, and we had the workshop going. But I think in art education, we need to have physical connection with the students. We can do that online, of course, but we are losing something in between. So I think we need maybe to renew our way of teaching. Maybe we're not used to this really. So I think it's very hard to teach art education, and with all teachers are sitting home trying to reach students, it's a hard situation really.
Did anybody start to do any weaving with other forms of material? Were they actually able to use things that they found in their homes or in their?
Well, I asked them to do that, to have a hard cartoon and build their own small loom, and we start to do little things. But this can go with children. It's not really useful for students in the higher education, because whatever I'm going to do on this little frame, it's not going to be really high level techniques. It will be very simple, like for students in the school. And we have bigger loom in the college.
An interesting dilemma to actually rethink how we do things, though. because I've seen so many art educators at the moment who are like literally throwing out the rule book and saying, well, how do we do it differently then? How might we weave in plastics, and how might we weave with things we find around our home, rather than working in a kind of a technical material way to actually let the materials do some of the thinking for us. But it is really difficult for teachers who are facilitating a technical material discussion with students. And so how you have a kind of conceptual material discussion is something that's actually quite different and does take a bit of a rethink for teachers, I think. Patsy?
I'm not actually in the college at the moment, but I'm obviously keeping in touch with my colleagues, and very much so with the Art Teachers Association in Ireland. And I'm sure it's the same all over the world. One of the things, bits of advice that I would ask, or we would give to them, comes from the proverb, necessity is the mother of invention. Every single country is experiencing lots of difficulty, particularly in terms of exams that the students have to do. We have a new curriculum at junior cycle level, which is the age 15, that the government have now had to find another way to assess. And our students and our teachers are extremely stressed at the moment about assessment, but they're finding ways about it. And one of the ways that they're finding is by collaborating with each other online and sharing. The amount of sharing that I have seen online at the moment has been incredible, absolutely incredible. And one of our colleagues just posted on the InSEA Facebook page and group recently, UNESCO's list of sites, absolutely incredible. I'd need a day to research every single one of them, but it's out there and teachers are trying. And the best part is they're engaging with each other. They're posting the work that they're doing. They're asking each other's questions. And that's what I would say. Keep asking each other, because you're going to learn from each other. People want to learn. In my research, when we were looking at continuing professional development or professional development for teachers, they said that they wanted to learn from each other as well as from professionals in the area. And this is one of the things that they're doing at the moment. Sharing is showing that they're caring for each other. They're helping each other. They're showing resilience. They're giving great ideas, and creativity is coming to the fore.
And there's no one way that works. It's got to work for the community, like Samia said, you know, bringing those people together to work in that community works. And for many of us, working digitally is actually something that we're kind of accustomed to, but not everybody is accustomed to that kind of collaboration online as well.
The difficulty that I think some people are finding, and I'm sure it's not just in Ireland, is that not all of the children and not all of the teachers have good access to online resources, or even to Wi-Fi in the first place. And that's a challenge. That is a challenge, but I think we also have to think very carefully about the outcomes and look at what people can do with the little that they have. And they actually can do quite a lot, and they should be commended for it. But it's the sharing of that that's really important, because it gives other people hope, and it lets them know that we're all in the same position. We're all having these difficulties.
Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Actually, I'm going to defer to Teresa. She needs to perhaps leave the meeting early, so I'm going to slightly defer over and listen to her wisdom for a moment.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. I hope I can stay until the end, but I'm not sure. So, just tell you our experience here in Portugal. So, schools closed maybe 10 days before Easter. And it was a panic. The teacher didn't know what to do, headmaster didn't know what to do, and the government didn't know what to do. So everyone just rushed into digital forms and platforms, and it was a chaos everywhere, because each teacher had their own social networks, Skype, WhatsApp, Teams, Zoom, whatever. So it was really chaotic before Easter. And then the government made an emergency crisis meeting with the association and with unions and with the teachers from university and other teachers. And they set up some guidelines for the schools, but here in Portugal, we have flexibility. So the schools, they can do their own curriculum or they can adapt their curriculum. So I think now it's still a bit chaotic, and we are not really taking into account several problems that are rising. And the first one is protection. Kids are vulnerable, and we are opening up our homes, we are opening up kids' homes, and this is really a problem. There's a philosopher, no, not philosopher, I think she's economist, Shona Zuboff, and she talks about this capitalism of surveillance with the internet coming to our homes, and we really need to be aware of this in this moment, because we are completely unprotected and we are putting our kids at risk, kids and students and so on. So this is one thing I really want to put here in the conversation. And another thing is discrimination. Because there is this digital divide and not all the students have access to internet, or even if they are. For instance, I was in a meeting with people from Serbia and Bosnia, young researchers, and they said, now I need to close my meeting because my daughter, she needs to have online class. So there's only one computer for the parents and for the kids, or only one television. Right now here we also have television programs. But still, it's discriminatory, because some kids, they don't have access. In some houses, they don't have internet, and we don't think about those kids. So this is another big problem, discrimination because of the digital divide. And then the third problem I see, I'm not against digital things or whatever. Well, since the last 30 years, I work digital as an artist, so on. But I think arts is embodied, like you said, Kate. We need our body, we need our mind, and we cannot go to everything online. And right now we are with Célia and the other leaders from the Visual Art Teacher Organization, we are working with teachers to tell them, please don't do too much homework. Don't give more, this standardized exercise, quiz and Google things. Don't do that, because the kids are spending hours and hours in front of a screen. And in school, they already have to lose their bodies, but now it's worse, it's much worse. So I think this is also a big problem. We are losing their body. Tomorrow we'll have a meeting with all the organizations, the teacher associations in Portugal. And I hope to tell the teachers about that. It's really problematic. And I remember Glen, he put on Facebook an image. It was a kind of a metaphor, a visual metaphor using Magritte painting. It's a scene, a passing peak. And he put a computer. And he said, this is not a school. It was really, this metaphor was really, this is what it happened in this moment. And we have so many problems. An art teacher needs to work with the body, whatever art is working, because it's through our bodies that we have perception of the world. And for your question about what an art teacher should be more involved right now, I think it's not really on the context like how to paint, how to draw, but how to think, how to raise questions, how to relationship with the environment and with the peers and with space. So I think really we need to reframe all teacher training, initial teacher training. We need to reframe the curriculum, not only in arts, but everywhere. Because, well, I feel that we didn't prepare the citizens to what we are living now, in terms of criticism, in terms of creativity, and in terms of resilience, like you said. We need our bodies to be resilient. So that's more or less what the point I am thinking in this moment, and I'm really worried with all these problems I just stated.
Thank you. You've raised lots of issues that I have myself as somebody who's really interested in digital learning, but also who is interested in how we actually create opportunities to develop artistic and visual identities. And that doesn't require online learning. It's one of the things that I hoped that you would all be able to share, and you've already started to touch on it, which is that artists and art educators think differently about learning and teaching. We have a very different understanding when we talk about the teaching of art and the learning of art. And so this remote teaching emergency that many educators find themselves in, art educators are finding themselves in a different environment, because how do we actually create opportunities for children and young people to learn on their own remotely is different from the concerns of learning how to teach remotely. So how do we actually prepare becoming teachers for student-centered and learning-centered studios when they're not with us is one of the challenges that I guess people like us who are, kind of educators in higher education and in teaching associations, that we need to ask our teachers to think differently about. It's right, it's not about the technique, it's about visual literacy, it's about digital literacy, it's about creativity, it's about aesthetics. It's actually about very different things that are about learning. How we engage learners is the problem, or the problematic, I guess, that we're all kind of facing and seeing a range of teachers be challenged by. And maybe it is going back to what an artist does, or what an artist would do, needs to actually be the question, rather than how am I going to teach that online? Mm-hmm. Glen.
Yeah, I think Steve wanted to come in. I'm just taking this on board, and I just want to echo, agree with what both Patsey and Teresa have been saying. We really need to rethink our whole modus operandi at the moment. We really have to think, how do we meet this challenge? I have some thoughts. I made some notes, but I'd like to just listen just now, if you don't mind, and give Steve the opportunity, if that's okay, Kate.
Thanks, Glenn. I want to echo what Teresa said already, because in my local community, we have quite a few impoverished students and families. They're single parent, multiple children, and we don't have the ability to provide technology to the students, even though the school board is supposed to be using one-to-one technology. So every student is supposed to have a Chromebook that they use for their educational processing. But what happens is when the students go home, they don't have a connectivity. And so one of my student teachers is working in one of these poverty schools, and I met with them yesterday and asked her, what are they doing with their students? And the cooperating teacher she's working with was clever, because we know we're clever people as artists. Not only do the students not have connectivity, they don't have food. So the parents can just drive by the school, and someone runs out with a bag lunch that the students would be getting every day if they were in school. They'd be getting free meals. So in that bag lunch, the art teacher puts materials in there with a challenge, with a prompt about perhaps draw what you see out of your window, or how many textures can you find in your house or around your house. So like everyone's saying, it's not necessarily a technical component as much it is a conceptual and a creative component. And I don't know about the rest of the world too much, but we're not very good at that in the US. We're very good at rote memorization. We're very good at answering ABCD in a logical stream. We haven't been very good at teaching our citizens how to think critically, even to critically about digital media and what's actually has veracity and what is completely fabricated. So I think that the shift of what we're having to do and to change the way we value what we teach, one of those components, necessary components, is how to teach people how to think. So thinking about thinking might be my new guiding paradigm that I want to share with my student teachers, that then they can share with their their future students. I think that student teachers are doing some interesting things. I think, Kate, you're involved in this some years ago when you're doing photography with a school in Denver, and they were documenting, capturing their neighborhood, and then sharing that across media. So one of my students is doing daily capture of their student's life. Another student is doing journal entries. So a little bit like Samia, they're making maquettes, so they're making conceptual map of what they will do once they get access to paint and canvas and printing press and those things. But they're developing a system of thinking that is new to some of our students. And finally, before I defer to everyone, my students are opening virtual chat rooms for their students. So they might have 2 hours of a room like this, and students can log into that room. And the sad part about our students here in the Ozarks is there might be 50 design students in combined classes, but only 2 or 3 are logging into the virtual room to chat with the teacher. So it's a challenge to motivate students too, because when we closed schools quite some time ago, the students thought that was the end of school. So they don't really care. The government has said we can't fail students, we can't assess them, unlike what's going on in Ireland. Apparently all students will pass, regardless of whether they're engaged or not. So we're in some difficult times to rethink from the federal level and the state level, what do we value, how are we going to teach it and assess it.
It's an ongoing problem of when we advocate and when we activate, isn't it? You know, so we are often advocates for our field, but I think we're at a time when we actually need to be thinking more about the activisms that art education offer. And I love what becoming teachers and new graduates are actually starting to think about, in different ways of starting to think about what access looks like. We talk a lot about inclusion in teacher education, but a lot of that is very theoretical, and the actual adoption of an inclusive art classroom has to be multiplicitous. We're thinking about multiple scales, not just about knowledge construction, but also about your access to that knowledge. And that's a really wide spectrum. Some of the things that I'm doing here with my students includes just posting artworks to each other and doing, you know, what the Surrealists did in An Exquisite Corpse, and posting a bit each week that goes on to another house. And so it does mean that we're connecting to each other, but we're not having to think about what that online connection means. Because even if you have access, some students are being asked to engage online for hours on end, because a lot of teachers are doing remote online teaching and not actually thinking about what happens on the other end of it when someone is sitting on the end of your teaching for 1 hour, which you would not normally do in a physical classroom. You would feel the room, and the tension in that room would mean that you would stop talking at a certain point. But it doesn't happen when you've just got a bunch of faces who look like they're quite engaged and smiling and nodding. Célia, did you want to say anything before I jump to Glen?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to do art in the digital. Some techniques we need to feel the things, and I think it's very difficult in the digital form. Sorry.
Thank you. Glen?
Yeah, it's very interesting, this discussion, and I see a lot of common threads, and I'm not good at thinking on my feet, so what I did was I made some notes in response to your questions, and I'm reflecting on the fact that I'm really fortunate in the sense that I had a long time working in Scotland in secondary schools and in initial teacher education. Now I'm working in Finland, and there's quite a contrast there. And as Teresa said, this problem of access to technology is a real problem in Scotland, because there are huge areas of of deprivation, especially in the big cities, so there can be real problems of access, but that's not an issue in Finland.
Mm.
It's definitely not an issue in Finland. So I just wanted to share some thoughts with you on, you asked about what's the role of art and design and art education in these times. So I'm thinking it's fine to supervise students using video conferences when working on like a thesis or some kind of fairly mechanical supervision, or the theoretical aspects of art and art education. It gets much more challenging when we want students to engage in experiential and collaborative learning. And that's at the core of what I try to do in Finland. This myth of the creative genius working alone in the studio with a flash of inspiration has, I hope, been well and truly debunked. I think it was Picasso who said that inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. I think he was referring to the notion of thinking through making. And I think that's really, Samia talked about weaving. How do you do this digitally? You have to work with the materials. And so I think that's a huge challenge with internet-based tasks and challenges, is that they tend to promote a passive learning mode. So I've tried to develop materials that involve a problem or a challenge that has to be tackled through making in some way, and where possible, interacting with others and or the built and natural environment. So in my view, the role of art and art education in these times is to promote qualities that we all aspire to promote: enthusiasm, persistence, creativity, curiosity, resourcefulness, civic mindedness, empathy, self-discipline, and an ability to work in groups. And those are not qualities that can be easily promoted in a distance learning scenario, nor are they easily assessed. But we need to continue to develop creative ways of developing a community of learners that is engaged with materials and context. And that's a huge challenge. I don't know what the answer to it is. And I really hope that this terrible situation that we find ourselves in, where teachers are forced to put much of their lifelong experience online, doesn't lead to a situation where we forget about that learning through making, that experiential nature of our subject. It's essentially experiential. It's about playing with materials, with clay or with paint, whatever, and working together on something. So we have to be very careful that we don't lose that dimension of our subject, because for me it's at the core.
So something interesting in that, which I think art educators touch on but maybe haven't explored in their research a lot, is this concept of studio pedagogy. And so what are our studio pedagogies? All of us have just been able to name, and are possibly some ideas for us to think about why art matters in schools, and to not use that kind of edu-speak lingo of 21st century skills, but to be thinking about what studio pedagogies enable. That to learn to be curious and critical, to be metacognitive, like Steve was referencing. And I love the concept of thinking about thinking, which is what artists do all the time. That's why we research and rethink and remake, redesign, diarize, journal. That concept is a part of the way that we teach. So a studio pedagogy is embodied and experiential, and it's reflective. And so there are some things that we can do online, and some of the teachers, I guess, that we know that are online right now are struggling to do some of those things. So how can we teach some of that at home? How do we ask a student to still engage in that, however difficult it is, if we are not going to be back at school, maybe at least for another 3 months, awfully 6 months? How do we actually ensure that those capabilities, and to me, they're attributes, how do we actually create environments for that? Because that's why art matters. We can't lose the why art matters in education bit, I think. Teresa?
Thank you. Before I put some more questions, I would love to show you just some drawings that kids are sending to us. So, okay, here they are. So when it starts, this was the kind of description, visual description about the situation. Very positive message. And we asked teachers to work with students just storytelling, because expression of feelings through image, through text, photography, collage, or whatever, because this is really important in pedagogy, in art, this expression and communication. Okay, maybe I can. This drawing is from an autistic kid, and of course we have this message from the media and the teachers that we need to protect, you cannot go out, and this is important. So, but they are reflecting about the situation using art. So I think this is important. Keep making art, keep reflecting about your daily life, and bring your questions, bring what you are feeling. This is about the mother cutting the hair of the father because everything is closed. So it's storytelling, but storytelling is so important when you are closed in an apartment with the family. There's something that I didn't say, and I'm worried. It's also about these closed spaces with families, and with some families that are not very safe environments for kids. So I also think about those kids, and art for them can be an escape. So this is, I think, this is really important. Taking art as a way of expression, of telling stories, and I think we really should reinforce it. And something now we are suggesting to our teachers is that to make not exercise, but proposals to students, and to send by postcards. With Célia, we are working with Célia, sending postcards with proposals to make a research journal, to make a collector journal. So introducing this idea of collecting, of through drawings and collage and photography and so on, since they are very small until the university, they can do it. And they can collect, and they can think about what they collect. And this is doing the art, isn't it? So it's just some ideas we are putting in place right now.
Fantastic, thank you. So this gets to the idea that Glen was talking about, I guess, how the language of art continues means that we need to actually possibly rethink how we collaborate. So how do we collaborate when we can't physically be near each other? Needs to be one of the things that maybe, you know, in our early years art education, we need to actually start to think differently about. A lot of early years art education is technical, it's related to material practices, and we're learning about what it is that artists do. But maybe we actually need to focus on the conceptual nature of why art matters, that drawing is a language, that storytelling is art making, and that through that we actually start to learn these other attributes and capabilities that artists have. And instead of looking at art through artworks, we actually look at art as an artist. And that means that these kinds of attributes and capabilities would be taught from a young age, which we know that young people already are. Kids see the world as artists, and then that standardized education world starts to shift out of them, that maybe I don't need to see the world as an imagination anymore. And this is the kind of time that we can ask imagination, like you're doing, Teresa, to actually be at the forefront of thinking, what do I imagine my life to be like? What can I tell a story about this imagining? There's some really lovely opportunities to work with young people. I think some of the difficulties we've got with adult education is what that looks like for artists right now. When they're learning their practices as a professional artist, their identity actually requires some of the collaborative nature of working in studios together that maybe we can't offer, which is why Samia brought those artists together to work, because that was actually a necessity, that maybe young children in art education don't have the same dilemma around. Unmute. Awesome.
Yeah, can I just come in and I'm delighted to see Teresa's project, because I just read an article about a psychologist about resilience and how we promote resilience through art education. And one of the things that she was suggesting is that we need to teach pupils the means of resisting the oppression that they're going through at the moment, facing the problems, not being scared by them, and help them not to internalize that message. And projects like Teresa's, where the children are coming face on, it is a way of doing that. And it's difficult for teachers because we all have our fears, but by the children being able to write them, draw them, say them, whatever way they have to, visual literacy is really going to help these children in very difficult times. And it comes back to an article as well by Heather O'Neill, where she talks about what sort of art will be created during this pandemic, and you know, what purpose will it serve? But we have to also look at, and I came back to that idea about why do we create art, and how digital means are now helping us to see that. For example, Banksy's fantastic image where a heart is passed from one apartment to another, love from your heart to ours. It's to show comfort, it's to show amusement, for consolation. Okay, some of our cartoons also have had negatives, but they've brought a little bit of hope, and the children are getting involved in that as well. And those lovely, wonderful images of children who can't meet grandparents or friends or teachers, but they're coming together as families and as little groups, and they're using art to show how they feel, the good and the bad. And I think it's finding opportunities for children of all ages, and even for adults of all ages, to look at also how art can be used for activism, and how art can be used as a voice for those who are unheard at the moment. That's really, really important. And that's something that we need to get our teachers and our art educators to think about. How are we going to do that? And I put that question to the rest of the panel. How do you think we can get them to be activists and to record the voice of the unheard? That's an easy way out of this one for me.
Who would like to go first?
I do a tiny response, Patsy, because I think what you're saying is maybe the ground energy of why we do what we do. And I know when I'm making my own art, I make it because I can't talk about it. It moves outside of spoken or written language. It moves into that realm of where the infusion of my identity, my materials, and the energy that surrounds that is woven together to create this object. So I think that having an opportunity to give artists a voice and an opportunity to share that is maybe foundational to what we do and why we do it. I'm not sure how to approach that through a screen. And I think that all of us have talked about the need to be in proximity, the need to be in energy sphere, the need to continue with humanity and civility, and the need that we learn with tactility. We're not desensitizing ourselves, that we want to learn through our senses and through the invisible energy world as well as the physicality of the world. So I'm trying to figure out how to share that with my students. I've not been very successful with it. The school I teach in is still quite Bauhausian, and they're very much steeped into elements and principles as a methodology. And I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I care about the narrative and the context, not the technique. So I'm working in contradiction to the rest of the faculty. But I'm hoping that the InSEA group, all of us internationally, can start to provide tidbits of each puzzle that we can piece together to come up with this tapestry of what we value and what we can share with our citizens.
how do we create little art orbits? And then how do we share them? Is a dilemma. Glen.
When this coronavirus pandemic really hit a few weeks ago, we had a meeting of executive, and one of the responses was to have a short campaign which would invite people to send a poem, a drawing, short video, whatever, and we called it InSEA Draw Closer, as you know. And the idea was we may have to be forced physically apart, but how do we maintain this social connection in some way? And I think there has to be something, as Steve says, about art that expresses things that can't be expressed any other way. If you could write about it, you write about it. If you take a photo, you know, but actually art allows young people to say things and to think through scenarios that are very private in a way. And so the dilemma is, how do you promote that on a screen, and how do you encourage that? How do you support that on a screen? Because good teachers can do it just by being in the classroom and by leading and by gently prodding and giving direction. These are all subtle nuances that don't exist on a screen. It's a binary choice, one or the other. Yes, no, the way that computers work. So I don't know how we do this. I mean, in normal times, what I would be doing is insisting that my students' learning is always in a real life context. So the students are having to work with people in communities or with businesses. So they're actually having to be facilitators, negotiators, sometimes a little bit social workers as well. And the art, it's a process rather than an end product for many of them. And I don't know how we do that on screen. What I've tried to do is to gather resources, for example, YouTube clips of artists talking about their practice, and ask students to unpick them and then find examples for themselves. But it feels engineered to me. It feels contrived. Now that might be my limitations in the technology, that's for sure, it could well be. But I think there's something that we are in danger of losing here by this headlong rush into, right, we just take all that learning and we put it into the computer now. I mean, the flippant thing of saying this laptop is not a school, there's a serious point there, a really serious point. It isn't a school, and what are schools for? They're not to produce people who are good at passing tests. They're about producing effective, creative, social human beings. And art has a central role in doing that, because of the way that you have to work through things in terms of thinking through making, and this thinking about thinking that's been said. It kind of gently forces people to do that, if you can have a gentle force, to actually go into a domain that's slightly out with the norm. Actually, this is very easy, to sit in front of a computer and to talk to each other and to receive all this information. And that's a little bit dangerous in my view, if we go too far down that road in education.
Well, there's a key word in there. You talked about process, and you also talked about some of the issues of assessment before. And I'm just thinking about these kind of orbits, Steve, and maybe we need to backward design what a remote art teaching looks like, and to think, like Teresa's doing, to actually think about creating a product that enables the process to actually, so you're making the process visible if you can somehow create a product environment. So the postcards, a digital portfolio, places where you can create orbits where the products go, but a generating process is actually one of the things that we probably really need to start to think about. And that might be the rethink in this that actually changes some art education. So instead of it being about the teaching of art, the learning of art actually becomes about learning about process to demonstrate my practice in a product. And we can generate some of that stuff online, but it does need to be rethought. The process doesn't happen online. The process can be peer reviewed and discussed. The product can be assessed and shared online. How we do the process bit is actually the difficult part. How do we teach all of the nuances, the technical, the material practices? That seems to be at the crux of what we have to try and work out how to do. And we're obviously not going to solve this issue tonight because it's a really massive one, because art education is embodied and physical. It is one of the things that we talk about and we advocate so hard for in our environments when we fight for that classroom with a sink and with windows. You know, there are part of the pedagogies are spatial. And so if a student is in a house that doesn't have all of those things, how do we still generate the same process? Samia, I'm going to ask you, seems you kicked us off thinking around embodiment and rule breaking, which I so like that artists do.
Yes. I think we need to start remaking our curriculum now in the, you know, regarding this situation, because if I'm teaching young students or children, it's easy to have them create their images on paper or whatever, and they can usually get excited with anything you say. But if you are teaching in a higher level, students need to have something that it's really building up each time you see them. They need new experience. They get really bored when you're not telling something serious. Okay, this time I'm tell them, let's make a composition about what we are having here in the quarantine. So, okay, next time what should I say? So I think I have to, for my subject I'm teaching, I have to make some subjects or maybe lessons that it's building up each time I give them some experience online, and make like alternative for the material, and maybe thinking of something that we can make videos, or using instead of yarns, we use papers or things like that. But I can't just do it right away because I need to make a plan, and put things in gradually in terms of having each time having some experience. And one more thing, students think that they can connect with you anytime on the day. So whenever they have question, they just go to Facebook inbox or to WhatsApp and ask you. And in the first time of, in the first 2 weeks, I realized that I'm sitting online all the time, answering all their questions and maybe showing some videos. So I thought, no, this is not going to work this way. So I had to set up with them one time each week for each class, that we are here for 3 hours or maybe 2 hours, because their class is 5 hours, experimenting and doing their weaving. So I told them we will meet each Thursday and the other class each Wednesday to do this. So last time it was very hard for me to find out what they're working. Some of them, they don't have materials, some of them they don't. So I said, okay, let's do designs. Next time we will have to do designs, and you decide which techniques will you work with, and just let's see videos and things like that. So I think for the next months, we need to think about a body of teaching that it's really will work online with all art education subjects. And I think it's for higher education, it's the difficult one. For young students, it's not really that hard. They do it as they are playing and they enjoying it, so spending some time with art. But for the higher education, we need to have a real body of teaching that it's set up for this situation.
Thank you. Glen, last word.
Sorry?
The last word is handed to you as we hit our hour.
Okay. I'm just going to agree with Samia that there's a danger of our working day becoming like 27 hours, 8 days a week. And we need, one of the things that I think art does really well is instill a sense of self-discipline and of independence and self-confidence for youngsters at whatever age. So we've got to be careful not to lose that. And I think this screen-based methodologies, or the ones I've seen so far, don't promote these qualities well. What they do promote is a kind of passive recipient approach. Can I just share a screen briefly with you? And it's when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about today, I came up with this. Now let me just see, where is it? Yeah. Ken Robinson. And he talks about creativity being a process and not an event. And so how can we address those three key aspects through a medium of the internet and through screens? I mean, you need to find what your medium is as an artist, right? And that can change. But how do we have a range of different options for youngsters? And then how do we encourage ways that they can control that medium, and then to experiment and to take risks? Because the danger is that the tasks that I've seen so far are quite closed. Like that's our response. It's going to be designed for a postage stamp. It's going to be whatever, and that's it. So how do we keep that world open is a big issue. There is something in that idea of this being a process rather than an end-on event, or it's certainly not a technical lockstep approach. And maybe that's what Steve was talking about in terms of what's been happening in the States. A lot of the time it's that we haven't had open-ended problem-solving situations a lot in our educational establishments. And that's what art education can do really, really well.
Fantastic. On that note, thank you very much, everybody.